The greatest thief of peace is rarely a lack of discipline. It is the habit of giving too much of yourself away, too much attention to opinions that change nothing, too much energy spent explaining yourself to people who have already made up their minds, too many thoughts invested in problems that were never yours to carry. Little by little, the mind becomes crowded, not because life demands it, but because everything is being allowed inside, and somewhere within that noise, clarity begins to disappear. Every day presents a choice: speak or observe, react or reflect, chase validation or build conviction. Most people never notice how much power they surrender through constant reaction. A comment lingers longer than it should. A criticism occupies mental space for hours. An opinion from someone who barely knows you somehow influences the way you see yourself. Over time, attention becomes scattered across countless things that deserve far less importance than they are given. The Stoics noticed this long before the modern world turned distraction into a way of life. They understood that freedom is not found in controlling what happens around you, but in controlling what gains access to your mind. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of this constantly, because even the most powerful person can lose their way when the noise of the world becomes louder than their own judgment. The question is not whether distractions will appear; they always will. The question is whether they deserve a place in your thoughts. Most people do not lose their focus in a dramatic moment. There is no clear warning sign, no sudden collapse, and no obvious point where everything changes. It happens quietly. Attention drifts a little at a time until distraction becomes part of daily life. A message arrives and instantly pulls the mind away from what mattered. A headline appears and suddenly demands attention. Someone shares an opinion, and somehow that opinion continues echoing in the background long after the conversation has ended. None of these moments seem important on their own. They appear harmless, almost too small to notice, yet when enough of them accumulate, they begin shaping the direction of an entire day. What makes this process difficult to recognize is how ordinary it feels. Everyone seems busy, everyone seems distracted. Constant reaction has become so common that it is often mistaken for genuine engagement with life itself. As the day unfolds, attention continues moving from one thing to another without much direction. A person may begin the morning with a clear intention, only to discover hours later that very little of what actually mattered has been accomplished. Energy has been spent, but not always in meaningful ways. Mental energy has been invested in concerns that offered very little in return. The mind becomes crowded with fragments, half-finished thoughts, unresolved conversations, imagined arguments, small frustrations, tiny worries. Each one claims a little space, and together they create a kind of internal noise that is easy to overlook until silence itself becomes uncomfortable. The ancient Stoics paid close attention to this tendency. They understood that the mind naturally moves toward whatever captures its interest, but they also recognized that not everything deserves equal consideration. One of the most valuable skills a person can develop is learning the difference between what deserves attention and what merely demands it. Modern life rewards responsiveness. It encourages constant engagement. Yet wisdom often requires the opposite. It requires the ability to pause before giving something access to your inner world. It requires asking whether a particular concern deserves a place in your thoughts at all. Notice how easily another person's words can shape an entire day. A passing criticism can remain present for hours. A misunderstanding can create an urge to explain, defend, or correct. Even when nothing practical can be done, the mind continues revisiting the situation, searching for a better response or a different outcome. Meanwhile, moments that deserve appreciation often receive only brief attention before being forgotten. This imbalance is not accidental. The mind is naturally drawn toward perceived threats and unresolved problems. What once helped human beings survive can now trap them in cycles of overthinking, comparison, and emotional reactivity. This is why attention is not just a mental function, it is the foundation of experience itself. Whatever consistently receives attention begins shaping perception. Perception shapes interpretation. Interpretation shapes emotion. Emotion shapes action. Repeated actions become habits, and habits become character. In this sense, attention quietly influences the direction of an entire life. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that external events possess far less power than people often assume. What truly shapes experience is the significance assigned to those events through attention and judgment. Many people believe they are simply responding to life as it happens. Yet much of what feels unavoidable is actually the result of unconscious habits of attention. The mind learns where to go through repetition. If it repeatedly focuses on criticism, criticism becomes more influential. If it repeatedly focuses on comparison, comparison becomes more dominant. If it repeatedly seeks validation, external approval gradually becomes tied to emotional stability. The process is subtle. That is exactly what makes it powerful. Small patterns repeated consistently shape outcomes far more than occasional dramatic events. The deeper reason attention is so easily captured has very little to do with notifications, headlines, or distractions themselves. Those things are only symptoms of something much older. Beneath the surface exists a desire that has accompanied human beings for thousands of years. The desire to belong, the desire to be accepted, the desire to feel understood. There is nothing wrong with these desires. They are part of being human. Long before modern technology existed, survival often depended on remaining connected to a group. Acceptance brought safety, rejection brought risk. Even though the world has changed dramatically, traces of that ancient instinct remain active within the mind. This is why approval can feel surprisingly rewarding and criticism can feel disproportionately painful. The reaction is often far greater than the event itself. A single comment can linger for hours. A brief misunderstanding can replay in the mind throughout an entire evening. Rationally, it may seem insignificant, yet emotionally it feels much larger. What hurts is rarely the event itself. What hurts is what we believe that event says about us. This is why Epictetus taught that people are disturbed not by things, but by their judgments about those things. The event happens first. The interpretation follows, then the emotional reaction emerges. Most people never notice this sequence because it happens so quickly. They assume the feeling was created by the event itself. Yet two people can experience the same criticism and respond in completely different ways. One sees it as proof of failure, another sees it as useful information. The event remains the same. The interpretation changes everything. Once this becomes visible, a small gap begins to appear between what happens and how you respond. Within that gap exists freedom. Instead of automatically believing every thought, you begin examining it. Instead of immediately accepting every emotional impulse, you begin observing it. This does not eliminate discomfort. It simply prevents discomfort from taking complete control. The desire for validation starts losing some of its influence. External approval becomes pleasant rather than necessary. Criticism becomes informative rather than devastating. If these ideas help you see yourself and the world more clearly, consider subscribing and continuing the journey. Not for constant motivation, but for the kind of reflection that strengthens judgment, deepens understanding, and brings the mind back to what truly matters. By subscribing, you are not simply following a channel. You are choosing to spend more time developing clarity, self-mastery, and a stronger relationship with your own mind. This tendency reveals itself in countless small moments. Someone praises your work and for a while everything feels lighter. Motivation increases, confidence grows. Then another person questions your decision or points out a flaw, and suddenly the emotional balance shifts. Nothing substantial has changed. The facts remain the same. the work remains the same. Yet internally, the experience feels completely different. This contrast reveals something important. The emotional reaction is not being created solely by external circumstances. It is being shaped by the meaning attached to those circumstances. In many cases, people are not reacting to what happened. They are reacting to the story their mind immediately creates about what happened. That story often develops so quickly that it feels inseparable from reality itself. At first glance, this idea can seem almost too simple, yet the more closely it is examined, the more powerful it becomes. Consider two individuals receiving the same criticism. One person sees it as evidence of failure and becomes discouraged. Another sees it as useful information and remains calm. The event itself is identical. What differs is the interpretation. This does not mean emotions are chosen consciously in every moment. Human beings are not machines capable of instantly controlling every feeling. What it does mean is that interpretation acts as a filter between events and emotional experience. That filter often determines whether a situation becomes a source of growth or unnecessary suffering. Most people move through life without paying much attention to this process. Thoughts appear automatically and are accepted without question. A criticism arrives and immediately becomes proof of inadequacy. A rejection occurs and instantly becomes evidence of personal deficiency. An opinion is expressed and somehow transforms into a verdict on self-worth. The mind is constantly creating meanings, drawing conclusions, and filling gaps in information. Often it does this so quickly that the conclusions feel objective, yet many of these conclusions are assumptions rather than facts. They are interpretations disguised as reality. This is why two people can experience the same circumstance and emerge with entirely different emotional responses. Their external situation may be identical, but the meaning assigned to it is not. This shift creates a different relationship with other people's opinions. Rather than treating every judgment as a reflection of personal value, it becomes easier to recognize that opinions often reveal as much about the person expressing them as the person receiving them. People speak through the lens of their own experiences, fears, preferences, and limitations. Their perspective is rarely complete, yet many individuals allow external judgments to carry enormous weight simply because they come from outside themselves. They assume another person's assessment must contain some deeper truth. Sometimes it does, often it does not. Wisdom requires learning the difference. The challenge is that the desire for validation can be subtle. It rarely announces itself openly. It disguises itself as a need for clarification, a wish to be understood, or a longing for fairness. There are moments when explanation is appropriate and necessary, but there are also moments when the urge to explain comes from something deeper. It comes from discomfort with being misunderstood. It comes from wanting reassurance that one's value remains intact. The mind seeks relief, and external approval appears to offer it. Yet relief obtained this way rarely lasts. It depends on circumstances that remain outside personal control. As a result, the cycle repeats itself. More approval is sought. More reassurance is needed. More attention is directed outward. The Stoics encouraged a different approach. They believed stability emerges when self-respect depends less on external reactions and more on internal alignment. This does not mean becoming indifferent to feedback or refusing to learn from others. It means developing a stronger connection to personal judgment than to public opinion. The goal is not isolation. The goal is independence of mind. When that foundation strengthens, criticism loses some of its ability to wound, and praise loses some of its ability to control. Both can still be acknowledged, but neither becomes the source of identity. This is where genuine freedom begins to emerge. External events continue occurring. Opinions continue appearing. Approval and criticism continue arriving as they always have. The difference is that they no longer possess automatic authority over the inner world. A person starts recognizing that meaning is not delivered by events themselves. Meaning is created through interpretation. Once that truth is understood deeply, the impulse to react immediately begins losing its grip. A quieter form of strength develops in its place. Not the strength of suppression, but the strength of perspective. And from that perspective comes the realization that not every thought deserves belief, not every opinion deserves attention, and not every emotional impulse deserves a response. At some point, a person begins to notice that not every battle is worth entering. Not every criticism requires a defense. Not every misunderstanding demands clarification. Yet this realization often feels uncomfortable at first because it challenges something deeply rooted in modern culture. People are taught that confidence means speaking up immediately, that strength means having an answer for everything, and that silence is somehow a sign of weakness. The loudest voice often receives the most attention, so it becomes easy to assume that attention and strength are the same thing. But they are not. Many reactions that appear powerful from the outside are actually signs of a lack of control. The urge to immediately defend, explain, correct, or retaliate is often driven by emotion rather than wisdom. It feels strong because it is intense. Yet intensity and strength have never been the same thing. This is why Seneca placed such importance on delay. He understood that emotions are often strongest at the very moment they are least trustworthy. Anger feels convincing when it first appears. Fear feels certain. Pride feels justified. Yet emotions have a way of changing once time enters the equation. What feels urgent in one moment often appears far less significant a few hours later. Delay creates perspective. It allows the mind to settle enough to distinguish between what is important and what merely feels important. In that sense, delay is not passive at all. It is an active refusal to let temporary emotions make permanent decisions. There is a quiet freedom hidden inside this practice. Most people spend their lives believing that external events control their reactions. Someone says something offensive, and anger seems inevitable. Someone disagrees, and defensiveness feels automatic. Yet when a small pause is introduced, something remarkable becomes visible. The event and the reaction are not the same thing. They are separated by a space, however brief it may be. Within that space exists the possibility of choice. The event still occurs. The words are still spoken. The criticism still arrives. But the response is no longer predetermined. A person begins recognizing that they possess more influence over their inner world than they once believed. This understanding changes the meaning of silence entirely. Silence is no longer about avoiding confrontation or withdrawing from life. It becomes a way of protecting clarity. It allows emotions to settle before they become actions. It creates room for observation. Often the most useful information appears after the initial emotional reaction has passed. What first seemed like an insult may contain a valuable lesson. What first appeared to be rejection may reveal a different opportunity. What felt like a personal attack may simply reflect another person's frustration or insecurity. These possibilities are difficult to see when the mind is rushing to respond. They become visible only when reaction gives way to reflection. The interesting thing is that silence often communicates more than words. A person who reacts to everything reveals that external events have immediate access to their emotional state. A person who remains composed communicates something different. Not superiority, not indifference, stability. There is a certain confidence in not feeling compelled to respond to every opinion, accusation, or provocation. It signals that self-worth is not hanging on the outcome of every interaction. It suggests that internal balance matters more than winning a momentary exchange. This kind of presence cannot be manufactured through clever arguments. It emerges naturally from discipline. Over time, this practice begins influencing other areas of life as well. The pause that once existed only during moments of conflict starts appearing elsewhere. Decisions become less impulsive. Attention becomes more deliberate. Choices become guided by principles rather than temporary emotions. A person stops feeling obligated to chase every thought that enters the mind. Not every urge requires action. Not every feeling requires expression. Not every reaction deserves obedience. This realization creates a sense of calm that many people spend years searching for in external circumstances. What makes this especially powerful is that it gradually shifts the source of control inward. Instead of being directed by whatever happens throughout the day, a person begins responding according to their own judgment. Circumstances still matter, but they no longer dictate every emotional movement. The world remains unpredictable. People remain imperfect. Challenges continue arriving without invitation, yet the relationship with those challenges changes. There is less urgency, less reactivity, and less dependence on immediate expression. In its place emerges something steadier, a quiet confidence rooted in the knowledge that not every impulse deserves a response, and not every emotion deserves authority. Once someone experiences the benefits of this kind of restraint, another pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Many of the things that drain energy are not major crises or significant obstacles. They are smaller habits that seem harmless on the surface, habits that slowly weaken focus, scatter effort, and pull attention away from meaningful action. Among them is one tendency that appears productive, even admirable, yet often undermines progress before it has the chance to take root. One of the most deceptive habits a person can develop is talking about progress before progress has actually been made. It rarely feels harmful in the moment. In fact, it often feels productive. A new goal appears, excitement follows, and the natural impulse is to share it. A plan is formed and immediately becomes part of a conversation. A vision for the future takes shape, and before the first meaningful step is taken, it has already been announced, explained, and discussed. The strange thing is that this behavior often creates the illusion of movement without requiring any actual movement at all. For a brief moment, talking about growth can feel surprisingly similar to experiencing growth. The mind receives encouragement, recognition, and sometimes admiration. Yet nothing has truly changed. The work still remains ahead. The challenge still exists. The distance between intention and achievement is exactly the same as it was before the announcement. This is why so many ambitions fade shortly after they are announced. The failure is rarely caused by a lack of potential. More often, it is caused by a loss of momentum. Excitement creates energy at the beginning, but excitement alone has never been enough to sustain meaningful effort. Discipline becomes necessary once novelty fades. The problem is that public declarations often place attention on the image of success rather than the process required to create it. Energy becomes divided. Part of it remains focused on the goal itself, while another part becomes invested in how the goal is perceived by others. As a result, concentration weakens. The mind begins thinking about outcomes, recognition, and future praise instead of focusing entirely on the next action that needs to be taken. The Stoics approached growth differently. They understood that real development takes place internally long before it becomes visible externally. Marcus Aurelius provides a powerful example of this mindset. Despite being one of the most influential individuals in the ancient world, he spent years writing private reflections that were never intended for public attention. His journal was not a performance. It was not a carefully crafted image designed to impress others. It was a tool for self-examination, a place where he confronted his weaknesses, corrected his thinking, and strengthened his character. There was no audience. There was no applause. There was only the work itself. That detail matters because it reveals something important about genuine progress. The most meaningful changes often occur when nobody is watching. There is a different kind of strength that emerges when progress remains private for a while. Without constant discussion, attention naturally returns to the work itself. Energy that would have been spent explaining intentions becomes available for execution. Instead of managing perceptions, a person focuses on developing competence. Instead of talking about discipline, they practice it. Instead of imagining future achievements, they engage with present responsibilities. This shift may seem small, yet its effects are profound. The mind becomes less concerned with appearing productive and more concerned with being productive. A quiet seriousness begins to replace the need for recognition. Over time, this creates a noticeable difference in character. People who constantly announce their plans often become emotionally attached to outcomes before they have earned them. Their identity becomes linked to future possibilities. When obstacles appear, disappointment feels personal because the imagined version of success was already part of their self-image. Those who work quietly tend to develop a more stable relationship with effort. They remain focused on the process rather than the performance. Their sense of worth becomes less dependent on visible results because they learn to value consistency itself. Progress stops being something that needs to be displayed. It becomes something that simply happens through repeated action. This perspective also changes the way setbacks are experienced. When growth is treated as a public performance, every mistake feels exposed. Every delay feels embarrassing. Every obstacle becomes difficult to separate from personal identity. Private effort creates more freedom. Mistakes become lessons rather than public failures. Progress unfolds at its natural pace without the pressure of maintaining an image. There is room for adjustment, experimentation, and patience. These qualities are essential because meaningful development rarely follows a straight path. It requires correction. It requires humility. It requires the willingness to continue working even when immediate results are absent. Eventually, something remarkable begins to happen. The need for recognition starts losing its influence, not because achievement becomes unimportant, but because the source of satisfaction changes. Fulfillment comes from keeping promises made to yourself. Confidence grows from evidence rather than imagination. Discipline becomes less about motivation and more about identity. Actions begin speaking louder than intentions because actions contain proof. There is no need to convince anyone of future success when daily behavior already reflects commitment. This is why some of the strongest foundations are built in silence. Hidden effort develops resilience in ways public performance never can. The absence of applause forces a person to discover deeper reasons for continuing. Progress becomes rooted in values rather than validation. And once attention is no longer consumed by how growth appears to others, another realization emerges. Some of the most powerful transformations begin not when a person learns how to gain more attention, but when they learn how to direct more of it inward. One of the first discoveries many people make is how often fear disguises itself as something more respectable. Fear rarely introduces itself honestly. It does not usually announce its presence by saying, "I am afraid." Instead, it often arrives wearing a different mask. It presents itself as caution. It presents itself as practicality. It presents itself as waiting for the perfect moment. A person may spend years convincing themselves they are simply being careful when, in reality, they are avoiding discomfort. They delay difficult conversations, postpone meaningful goals, and avoid necessary risks while believing they are making rational decisions. Sometimes they are. Often they are protecting themselves from the possibility of failure, rejection, or uncertainty. The distinction matters because a problem cannot be addressed clearly until it is seen clearly. The same pattern appears in other forms as well. Ego is particularly skilled at hiding itself. Most people imagine ego as arrogance, pride, or an inflated sense of importance. Yet ego frequently appears in more subtle ways. It can disguise itself as defensiveness. It can appear as the need to be right. It can emerge through the constant desire to explain, justify, or protect an image. A person may believe they are standing up for themselves when they are actually defending an idea of themselves. They may believe they are seeking understanding when they are really seeking validation. These realizations are rarely comfortable. In fact, genuine self-observation often creates discomfort because it challenges stories that have been accepted for years. Yet discomfort is not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it is evidence that something important is finally being seen. This is why self-knowledge has always been considered such a valuable pursuit. It is not because understanding yourself makes life easier. Often it makes life more demanding. Once a person becomes aware of certain patterns, pretending not to see them becomes difficult. Excuses lose some of their power. Rationalizations become easier to recognize. The responsibility for change becomes harder to avoid. Yet this responsibility is also where growth begins. The Stoics understood that lasting improvement requires honesty before anything else. A person cannot correct a weakness they refuse to acknowledge. They cannot strengthen an area of their life they are unwilling to examine. Awareness becomes the starting point for every meaningful transformation. As observation deepens, another pattern becomes increasingly obvious. Many decisions that feel personal are actually influenced by comparison. People often assume they are pursuing goals because those goals genuinely matter to them. Sometimes that is true. Other times the desire has been shaped by watching someone else. Success begins looking attractive because it earned another person recognition. A lifestyle becomes appealing because it appears impressive from the outside. An achievement becomes important because society assigns status to it. Without realizing it, entire ambitions can be built on borrowed values. This creates a strange kind of emptiness because even when progress is made, satisfaction remains incomplete. Something feels missing. The achievement is real, yet fulfillment remains distant. The reason is simple. Goals pursued for external reasons rarely create internal peace. The more attention turns inward, the easier it becomes to distinguish conviction from comparison. Conviction feels quieter. It does not require constant reinforcement. It remains present even when nobody is watching. Comparison, on the other hand, depends heavily on external reference points. It constantly measures, evaluates, and competes. It looks outward for direction. Conviction looks inward. This difference changes the way decisions are made. A person becomes less interested in keeping pace with others and more interested in remaining aligned with what genuinely matters to them. This creates a sense of stability that comparison can never provide, because comparison always depends on circumstances that continue changing. The Stoics believed that governing one's life begins with governing one's mind, not because complete control is possible, but because responsibility begins there. Thoughts influence actions. Actions shape habits. Habits gradually shape character. Ignoring the condition of the mind while attempting to improve life is like neglecting the roots of a tree while focusing only on its branches. Temporary changes may occur, but they rarely last. Sustainable growth requires attention to the source. It requires understanding what drives behavior beneath the surface. This process is not selfish. In fact, it is one of the most responsible things a person can do. Someone who refuses to examine themselves often projects their frustrations onto others. Someone unwilling to confront their own weaknesses becomes quick to criticize weaknesses elsewhere. Over time, these shifts create something deeper than improved habits. They create a different relationship with oneself. The need to constantly look outward for answers begins fading because trust in personal judgment strengthens. Not blind confidence, not arrogance, trust built through observation, reflection, and experience. The mind becomes less of a stranger and more of an ally. And once that relationship begins to develop, another transformation quietly takes shape. The world itself has not changed, yet the way it is experienced starts changing in profound ways. As awareness grows, an interesting realization begins to emerge. The world itself has not changed nearly as much as it first appears. The same distractions still exist. The same opinions continue circulating. The same unexpected problems arrive without invitation. Difficult people remain difficult. Uncertainty remains a permanent part of life. Yet something feels different. What changes is not the environment, but the relationship with it. Events that once seemed overwhelming gradually lose some of their power. Situations that previously consumed entire days now pass through the mind with less resistance. The challenges have not disappeared. The attachment to them has weakened. This distinction is important because many people spend years waiting for external circumstances to improve before allowing themselves to feel at peace. They imagine calm will arrive once everything becomes easier, more predictable, or more favorable. Life rarely offers that arrangement. The Stoics understood this reality deeply. They did not pursue peace by trying to eliminate difficulty from their lives. They pursued it by changing the way they responded to difficulty. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire filled with political conflict, uncertainty, war, and constant pressure. Yet his writings rarely focus on controlling events themselves. Instead, they focus on controlling perception, judgment, and conduct. He understood something that remains true today. The mind suffers most when it demands that reality be different from what it is. The more energy spent resisting unavoidable circumstances, the less energy remains available for meaningful action. Acceptance, in this sense, is not surrender. It is clarity. It is seeing things as they are before deciding what can actually be done about them. One of the most liberating realizations a person can experience is understanding that not every misunderstanding requires correction. This idea can feel uncomfortable at first because the desire to be understood runs deep. Most people want others to see their intentions accurately. They want fairness. They want clarity. They want their actions interpreted correctly. Yet, reality often refuses to cooperate. Some people will misunderstand despite every effort to explain. Others will form opinions based on incomplete information. A few may simply choose not to understand at all. Trying to control these outcomes can become exhausting. The pursuit of universal approval quickly turns into a battle that cannot be won because it depends entirely on factors outside personal influence. The Stoics often used the image of a flowing river to describe life. The metaphor remains powerful because it captures something fundamental about the human experience. Life is movement. Circumstances change constantly, relationships evolve, opportunities appear and disappear, success arrives and eventually fades, challenges emerge without warning, the current never stops moving. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy attempting to control that movement. They fight against outcomes they dislike. They cling desperately to outcomes they enjoy. Yet the river continues flowing regardless of personal preference. Resistance may feel productive, but often it only increases frustration. There is another approach. Instead of trying to control the current itself, attention can be directed toward how one moves within it. This is where influence truly exists. A person cannot decide what events will occur tomorrow, but they can decide how they prepare today. They cannot determine every opinion others will hold, but they can determine whether those opinions deserve a place in their mind. They cannot eliminate uncertainty, but they can strengthen their ability to meet uncertainty with composure. This distinction changes everything because it redirects energy away from impossible tasks and toward meaningful ones. As this perspective deepens, a subtle sense of freedom begins to emerge. The need to react to everything starts fading, not because nothing matters, but because priorities become clearer. Some situations deserve action, others deserve patience. Some challenges require engagement, others require distance. Wisdom often lies in knowing the difference. Without that distinction, energy becomes scattered across countless unnecessary battles. With it, attention becomes more focused and deliberate. Life still contains complexity, but complexity no longer creates the same level of internal chaos. Perhaps the most surprising part of this transformation is how ordinary it looks from the outside. There are no dramatic announcements, no sudden reinventions, no grand displays of personal growth. The changes occur quietly. A person becomes less reactive, less defensive, less dependent on immediate validation. They spend less time trying to manage every external outcome and more time managing their own responses. The world remains unpredictable, yet it feels less threatening. Difficult conversations still happen, but they carry less emotional weight. Setbacks still occur, but they no longer define entire chapters of life. Over time, this creates a different way of moving through the world. Challenges become information rather than personal attacks. Obstacles become opportunities to practice patience rather than reasons for frustration. Uncertainty becomes something to navigate rather than something to fear. The current continues flowing exactly as it always has, yet the struggle against it gradually disappears. In its place emerges a steadier presence, grounded not in controlling life itself, but in understanding where influence begins and where it ends. And once that understanding takes root, another transformation quietly unfolds, one that changes not only how a person responds to the world, but how they ultimately define themselves within it. After enough repetition, what once felt like a difficult practice begins feeling natural. The effort that was required in the beginning gradually gives way to something steadier. There is less internal resistance, fewer battles against impulse, less confusion about where attention should be directed. The habits that once demanded conscious discipline become woven into daily life. Not perfectly. No meaningful transformation is ever perfect. Yet there comes a point when a person no longer feels as though they are forcing themselves to think differently. They simply do. The change is subtle enough that it can go unnoticed for a while. Then one day, a situation arises that would have once created stress, frustration, or endless overthinking, and the response is different. Calmer, more measured, less reactive. That is often when the transformation becomes visible. The outside world may not notice much at first. Daily routines still look familiar. Responsibilities remain. Conversations continue. Life moves forward much as it always has. Yet internally, something significant has shifted. The mind is no longer carrying the same amount of unnecessary weight. Thoughts that once occupied entire afternoons now pass through much more quickly. Opinions that once demanded emotional investment lose much of their influence. The endless cycle of reacting, explaining, defending, and seeking reassurance begins fading into the background. In its place emerges a sense of mental space that many people have not experienced in years. It feels as though something heavy has been set down, even if it is difficult to identify exactly what that something was. One reason this change feels so powerful is because clarity starts returning. Clarity is often misunderstood as having all the answers. In reality, clarity has more to do with removing confusion than acquiring certainty. A person does not suddenly understand everything. They simply stop filling their mind with things that never deserved so much attention. The noise decreases. Priorities become easier to recognize. Decisions that once felt complicated begin revealing themselves more clearly because there are fewer competing voices influencing them. This does not eliminate difficult choices, but it makes those choices easier to approach with honesty. The mind spends less time being pulled in opposing directions and more time focusing on what truly matters. As clarity strengthens, confidence begins changing as well. Many people spend years chasing confidence through achievement, recognition, or approval. They believe confidence arrives when enough people acknowledge their worth or when enough goals have been accomplished. Yet that kind of confidence remains fragile because it depends on conditions that constantly change. Real confidence develops differently. It grows through repeated experiences of trusting your own judgment. It grows when actions consistently align with values. It grows when promises made to yourself are kept. especially when nobody else is watching. Over time, this creates a foundation that is much harder to shake because it is built on evidence rather than opinion. This naturally influences communication. Something interesting happens when a person no longer feels the need to prove themselves constantly. They begin speaking less, yet their words often carry more weight. There is less urgency behind what they say, less need to persuade, less desire to impress. Conversations become more intentional because words are chosen with greater care. Silence no longer feels uncomfortable or threatening. It becomes a useful part of communication rather than something that must always be filled. People often assume influence comes from speaking more, but genuine influence frequently comes from speaking with purpose. Words gain value when they are supported by thought, experience, and restraint. Gradually, progress is evaluated differently. Many people spend years measuring success through visibility. They look at attention, recognition, status, or comparison with others. Yet these measurements often create frustration because they are influenced by countless factors outside personal control. A different standard begins emerging. The question is no longer how much attention has been received. The question becomes whether actions align with values. Did behavior reflect the person you are trying to become? Were decisions guided by principles rather than pressure? Did actions match intentions? These measurements are quieter, but they are also far more meaningful because they remain within reach, regardless of external circumstances. This is very close to what the Stoics meant when they spoke about inner sovereignty. The phrase may sound grand, but the reality is surprisingly practical. It is not about dominating circumstances or becoming immune to emotion. It is not about controlling every outcome or achieving perfection. It is about refusing to hand over authority for your inner life to forces you cannot govern. The world remains unpredictable. People remain inconsistent. Challenges continue appearing without warning. Inner sovereignty means these realities no longer determine the quality of your character. They influence circumstances, but they do not dictate conduct. That distinction creates an extraordinary kind of freedom. From the outside, this transformation often appears quiet. There are no dramatic declarations, no obvious signs that a major change has occurred. Yet internally, the effects are profound. Energy begins returning because less of it is wasted on unnecessary concerns. Attention becomes stronger because it is no longer scattered across countless distractions. Peace becomes more available because it is no longer dependent on constant reassurance. The habit that once seemed simple reveals its true depth. Focusing on what can be controlled and releasing what cannot is not merely a useful idea. It becomes a way of moving through life. Eventually, this way of living stops feeling like a practice and starts feeling like a natural expression of who you are. The search for control over everything fades because it is replaced by something far more valuable: self-command. The need to chase every opinion fades because conviction has grown stronger. The urge to react immediately weakens because patience has become familiar. Life continues presenting the same challenges it always has, yet they no longer carry the same power. The mind is clearer, the energy is steadier, the direction is stronger, and what once seemed like a simple habit quietly reveals itself as one of the most powerful disciplines a person can cultivate, not because it changes the world around them, but because it changes the person moving through it. The world will keep asking for your attention. It will keep offering distractions, opinions, and reasons to abandon your peace. But the moment you stop giving your energy to everything outside yourself, you begin reclaiming something far more valuable than success or recognition. You begin reclaiming your own mind, and that is where true freedom begins. If this message resonated with you, don't stop here. Continue the journey by watching one of the videos on your screen right now. The next lesson may be the one idea that changes how you see yourself and the world around you. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal, Until next time, protect your peace, trust your path, and remember, the strongest person in the room is often the one who has mastered themselves.